So my idol, Paulo Flores, and Sister May just went over talk number 5, loving God, the first and greatest commandment. So now let's talk about the second greatest commandment, which is to love our neighbor. So let us begin by reading Matthew 22 verses 37 to 40. And one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. So Jesus summed up the 10 commandments into two greatest commandments. So if anyone asks you what the 10 commandments are, it's actually in here. But it's just love God and love your neighbor. Okay, so these two form the inseparable core of the Christian life. You cannot have one without the other. Because we cannot say that we love God without loving our neighbor. In 1 John chapter 4 verses 20 to 21, if anyone says, "I love God," but hates his brother, he is a liar. For whoever does not love a brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. This is a commandment that we have from him. Whoever loves God must also love his brother. Okay, so brothers, that's all or nothing. Love God, love your neighbor. So before we go into great detail about what Jesus meant by love, let us first see what Christian love is not. Christian love is not only having positive feelings. So sometimes we think that we love when we're happy, we're excited, and when there's physical attraction. So this is a common thing during the boyfriend-girlfriend stage. So there's my girlfriend. but when they get married, bigger challenges start to come. And there can be misunderstanding. So true love should remain even when the feelings change. So although feelings is one of the elements of love, it cannot be the sole basis of love. That's not a good foundation for love. Okay, so love is not always saying yes. So even if you're the yes man, you can't always say yes. So we think that as Christians, we have to say yes. Because if we don't, we're not good Christians, right? But that's not necessarily true. To love others or to put them first doesn't mean we cannot turn down opportunities to serve. Sometimes we're unable, sometimes you should not even if you're able. So an example of this is that if your close friend is try to ask for your help. Let's say Paulo asked for my help. "Ted, let's go rob a bank. I need $100. Will I say yes? Of course not, because that's immoral and we'll go to jail. Okay, so yeah, for $100. So this is similar to a parent-child relationship. You don't always say yes to your kids because you wanted to teach them discipline, right? And also with service in the community. Sometimes there are service that people are trying to call us to do, but sometimes we have to prayerfully consider it before saying yes. So that's an example. So we have the wrong concept of a loving person as a nice guy who tries to please everybody. Okay, so next, love is not defensive. Even if you're good in Kung Fu, it's not defensive. So sometimes we tend to create that boundary to protect ourselves from getting hurt. But that's not good because we don't get to experience the fullness of love. So when you love, you invest yourself. There are risks. What if a person betrays you, or what if your loved one dies, right? So Christian love is not guaranteed to be painless. but the pain is endured through commitment, and the injury is healed through forgiveness. Love is not self-seeking. We recognize that putting others' need first can be inconvenient sometimes or bothersome, but by its nature, Christian love is ready for self-denial. Love is not manipulative. So you manipulate when you give love as a form of reward and withdraw it as a form of punishment. Let's say let's say Paulo. Where's my favorite guy? Paulo, if thank you. So if let's say Paulo, buy me this stuff. If you don't buy this for me, I don't love you. Let's say so. This is not a good foundation for love. Okay, so excuse me. So what is Christian love? Christian love is loving others as Jesus loved. In John 13, verse 34, I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. That was the song earlier. So loving our neighbor is not an option. It is God's commandment. So Jesus elevated loving someone's neighbor to a higher level. We are to love our brothers not only as we love ourselves, but as He loves us. So since Jesus loved us with a self-sacrificing, forgiving, and prodigal love, He is telling us to do the same. So how did Jesus demonstrate that love, that Christian love? By washing the feet of the disciples. So most of you are familiar with this, the foot washing episode. Usually we see this during the Holy Week on Holy Thursdays, right? So it symbolizes humility and service. So the feet that Jesus washed during that time were the feet of the men who spent their whole day walking on dusty roads. So most likely they're very dirty. So what happened is Jesus approached Peter, and Peter told Jesus, "Are you going to wash my feet? You're not going to wash my feet." So let's say, Franco, if your boss approaches you and tells you, "Franco, I'm gonna wash your feet," what are you gonna say? Yes. Yeah, in the Jewish culture during Jesus' time, it's usually the role of the youngest servant to wash the feet of the guests. So Jesus did the unusual thing. He took a towel and a basin of water and washed the feet of the disciples. So let me read John 13 verses 12 to 15. It's not there. It's the washing of the disciples' feet. So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at the table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for indeed I am. If I therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do." Okay, so what Jesus demonstrated is the one that we call service love. So this is what we experience every week when we go here. There are a service team who come over and offer their time, their talent, and resources to demonstrate or to express their love for God and for their neighbor. But how much does Jesus love us? What is the extent of His love? And Jesus answered that question. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So, loving our neighbor demands not merely giving our time, our wisdom, or praying for them. If necessary, we should be prepared to give up our lives for them, just as Jesus did for us. Wow, that's really tough, right? But, but most of us are not put in that kind of situation. So what Jesus is telling us is that we should be ready to offer our lives in case we are put in that situation. So, what Jesus did, what this kind of love is what we call self-sacrificial love. The highest form of love, we call it agape love. Okay. So again, our model for Christian love is Jesus Christ, and Saint Paul describes the love that Jesus has for us in his letter to the Philippians. So I'm going to read Philippians chapter 2 verses 5 to 8. Have among yourselves the same attitude that is also yours in Christ Jesus, who though in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness, and found human in appearance. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So, St. Paul was talking about Jesus' humble servant status. He didn't regard himself as higher than anyone, but he came here to serve. He came here to offer his life for us to be redeemed and to be in unity again with the family of God. So in case you are to die for your neighbor, you gotta know who your neighbor is, right? So the parable of the Good Samaritan described the Christian love or loving our neighbor in great detail. So let me read to you the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's not it. So in Luke chapter 10 verses 30 to 37. Most of you are familiar with this though. The lawyer asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" A man fell victim. So Jesus responded, "A man fell victim to robbers as he went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road. When he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But the Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn." I guess I don't need. Do I need this? Took him to an inn and cared for him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper with the instruction, "Take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given you, I shall repay you on my way back." Which of these, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? So the lawyer answered, "The one who treated him with mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." So there are many parts of this parable that we have to look at. First, let us examine the response of the actions taken by the priest and the Levite. So why do you think they did not help the poor man? I mean, the guy that was beaten up. Could it be that they're just afraid that the robbers could still be hiding in that place and could attack him? Probably not, because I think their main purpose is maintaining ritual purity. Because the priest and the Levite serves at the temple. So if they approach the man wherein a blood was shed and the man was half dead, they will be ritually unclean. So it will take some time for them to be pure again. They will undergo a ritual purification. So what Jesus is trying to tell us is that the religious rituals during that time, loving one's neighbor, I mean, is more important than the religious rituals and practices. So that's what Jesus is trying to convey. Now let's take a look at the lawyer who asked who is his neighbor. So you can see in his response that when Jesus asked him who then is the neighbor to the man, and he said, the one who treated him with mercy. He didn't even mention the Samaritan. Why? Because the Samaritan and the Jews are enemies. They hated each other. It's more than Luke and Caroline, actually. But yeah, to give you a brief background, so it's they hated each other. It all started after the death of King Solomon, centuries before Jesus. So the kingdom of Israel was divided into two, the north and the south. Samaria in the north, and the Assyrians came over. They were intermarried, so they were pagans, so they were considered half-breed. They were worshipping idols. So they were not allowed to worship in the temple at Jerusalem. So that made everything worse for them. So the lawyer would know that a neighbor is defined as one's countryman, since the law was given by Moses to the nation of Israel alone. Okay, the parable, however, breaks through such interpretation. The neighbor is the one who acts compassionately toward another, ethnic divisions notwithstanding. So, to be a neighbor forces a Christian to go beyond friend and family and extend welcome and mercy to the outcasts and even to one's enemies. Jesus wants to convey that being a neighbor entails doing things and not merely wishing others well. But if you'll examine this parable, Jesus didn't really answer the question of who is my neighbor, because Jesus wants to leave that responsibility to us. He wants us to ask ourselves, am I being a neighbor to others? Now, let's go to the characteristics of Christian love. Let me read to you Corinthians, St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13, verses 4 to 8. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. It is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interest. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So we can be reminded of the characteristics of love if we replace the word love by I. So I want you guys to read this out loud. Okay? On a count of 3. 1, 2. I am patient. I am kind. I am not jealous. I am not pompous. I am not rude. I am not self-seeking. I am not quick-tempered. I do not brood over injury. I rejoice in truth. I forbear. I trust. I hope. I endure. One more time. Look at the person sitting next to you. I'm just kidding. Right, so yeah. So that can be used as a weapon. Alright, so in conclusion, my favorite part. Loving God and loving neighbor have been likened to the vertical and horizontal parts of the cross. One directs us upward to God, while the other directs us horizontally towards our fellow man. If you come into conclusion that loving our neighbor is difficult, you're extremely right. You're absolutely right. It is impossible without God's grace. So when we say love our neighbor, okay? Loving God, loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. Sometimes we tend to put the focus on ourselves. We're in the part of the picture, okay? The main part of the picture should be God, okay? Why? Because God is the source of love, and He gave that love really to us, for us to share. God is the source of love that never dries out. We're just like this cup of water, receiving God's love, and we are called to share this with others. Because if we don't share this, what happens? It becomes stale. It's gonna stink, right? So my friends, having said that, may God give you His peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ted.